Join us, true believers, as Spider-Man, Ice Man, and Firestar team up with the uncanny X-Men in a game of cat and mouse against a vengeful cyborg and a ticking time bomb. Excelsior! Battle of the Network shows. Join Rick Brooks and Mike Kogel as they explore the TV of the 70s and 80s through hand-picked episodes of their favorite and not-so-favorite series.
Welcome to Battle of the Network shows. I'm Mike.
And I'm Rick. Hello, everyone.
And today we're celebrating Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. A fan request, and I'll let Rick talk a little bit more about that, but from our 2 to 11-year-old demographic.
Yes. This season, if I may be so immodest, Mike, I think we're really hitting it out of the park so far and appealing to our 2 to 11-year-old demographic. And this is just going to be one more example of that.
Right. Easter Bunny?
Yeah.
Mr. Rogers?
Oh, yeah.
Maude?
Yeah. Wait. What? Maude. I wasn't aware of
and
that.
And Siskel and Ebert. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Something for every 2 to 11-year-old. And even the 2 to 11-year-olds at heart, I think, can appreciate some of these. But yeah, and this is a request, and not just any request, but a request from a friend of the show, Mike. Our good friend James, who many seasons ago sent me some really cool t-shirts. And in fact, I'd be wearing one of those today if not for the fact that I'm wearing my Spider-Man t-shirt. But James and his daughter Lucille have watched Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, and it's meant a lot to them, and they requested that we do this a while ago, and we're very glad to fit it in right here. James thanked us and said, I really want to thank you for allowing me to be part of the podcast. He says it's incredible for me to be able to participate in my absolute favorite podcast. Thank you. And I say thank you, James, for the support, and really appreciate the kind words. We gave his daughter Lucille the opportunity to pick which episode of the series we'd cover today, and she just said, hey, dealer's choice. And James kind of joked that it's a little bit unsettling because his daughter's 10 years old and apparently into gambling already. But, I think it worked out pretty well because we can't go wrong with any of these Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends episodes, so we're glad to be able to pick one. He said that they started watching when she was around 5, when she was fascinated with Dr. Doom, and it's a show that they've shared together. So he thanks us again, and I say, thanks to you, James and Lucille, and we're thrilled to have you be part of the show. And I also think it's funny that Dr. Doom, I think, shows up in like one of the early episodes of Amazing Friends, but he was all over the other Spider-Man series that's on Disney Plus, Mike. So it's kind of funny because Dr. Doom is in the opening credits here, but I keep waiting to see more of him, and yet he doesn't seem to be as much a presence in this one.
I think even as a kid, it seemed weird that Dr. Doom was a presence in either of them. Like, I didn't associate him with Spider-Man. So
no, the only reason I did was because there was a Superman, Spider-Man, one of those treasury-sized giant books, and he was the Spider-Man villain in that one. They did 2 of them, I think, so he was the villain in one of them, or a villain in one of them. But yeah, the same thing. I never thought of him as a Spider-Man villain per se, but the cartoons really kind of put him in there.
Yeah, and really Amazing Friends, it makes more sense because it's a broader kind of look at the Marvel Universe. But the fact that he was such a big presence on the other one, like he seemed like a main Spider-Man nemesis.
Right, when there were so many in his rogues gallery that were not appearing, in that series, nor in this series for that matter.
That's true. What, your Green Goblin, your Sandman, and Doc Ock, and Chameleon, I think. And does Scorpion show up in one of them? I don't think I've seen Scorpion. I remember Kraven. Yeah. I think Scorpion might. Yeah, Kraven and...
Vulture, I think, was in the previous Spider-Man.
The 60s one, yeah.
No, or I think he was in 1981.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, well, you know what? We're going to confuse everybody if we get too far into that right now. Because I'm confusing myself, actually.
Yeah. But then, you get a lot of other big, really kind of villains that seem a little... I love Spider-Man, but maybe out of his league. Like Magneto and Dr. Doom.
Yeah.
They're the kind of people that usually takes a group to finish, to defeat.
Correct. Good point. And, Spider-Man has maybe one of the richest arrays of villains to work with, too. So it's kind of surprising that, like, in this series and, other earlier versions of Spider-Man 2, they keep, like, bringing in other ones or coming up with, like, weird original creations or kind of street level threats for him to be dealing with when, there's a few that wind up sitting on the bench for who knows what reason.
Kingpin, that's the other pick.
Yes. Now, Kingpin, I could...
Literally.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Now, Kingpin, I remember him kind of being more of a thorn in Spidey's side in the comic book days.
Yeah.
But, I really can't complain about Doctor Doom being in any of these cartoons because Doctor Doom is kind of awesome, for a villainous madman.
I think that's really it. And he translates to cartoons so well.
Yeah.
Being in armor and shooting beams and talking about himself in the third person. I mean,
yeah.
And I think I'll say this in a general way, and then maybe we can get into it more. But this show does a fairly good job at capturing sort of the special Marvel quality of having a little more nuance to the characters and things. At least with the main characters, but the villains are straight up, just villains. There's like no subtlety to them at all.
That's a really good point. One that I had not thought about at all, even when preparing for this episode and just watching the show. But now that you mention it, and especially the episode we're going to talk about today in particular exemplifies that. But the Super Friends, part of it, cramming as many as 10 heroes sometimes into an episode. There was very little character development at all, even like earlier solo cartoons. Whereas there is that attempt to bring some emotions and feelings into it. And Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends is surprisingly mature in some ways. So I'm glad you said that. That's an excellent point.
Yeah, I mean, that's always the sort of generalized difference between Marvel and DC, or at least when Marvel sort of became what we know of as Marvel and became a big phenomenon in the 60s, that it, for lack of a better term, was more soapy, but also just was about the characters a little more and gave them problems other than villains, especially Spider-Man's the epitome of that, or Peter Parker is. But just the fact, to compare it to Super Friends, I can't think of really too many Super Friends episodes that even mention the idea of the characters' secret identities. Like every now and then Clark Kent would appear, I think, and maybe Bruce Wayne once or twice, but for the most part, they were just being heroes. They were at work. Whereas there's a lot of Peter and Bobby and Angelica just being, I guess, grad students, whatever they are. And, you still get some of the Flash Thompsons around causing trouble. And it's a different thing, especially for a Saturday morning cartoon in the 80s, I think.
Right. And I'm sure it's, intended to make the characters more relatable. And in a way it does. I love the Super Friends as a kid, but I also loved Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. And one thing that does kind of stand out is that it really, sometimes in goofy ways, but it leans into like the friends aspect of it. One of the things that Marvel did in the 60s was have like the characters bickering with each other. And that was one way to show them, as being human. And it sort of became a cliche after a while. And it became worse when like DC tried to copy that, or other people after Stan Lee tried to copy that. And one thing I like about Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends is they might joke with each other and maybe have some issues, but they're not squabbling all the time. They actually are friends that enjoy each other's company, and kind of also with that, and part of it's because it is a Saturday morning cartoon, but there's a general air of positivity. I mean, it is kind of cool to see Spider-Man having problems, but when you read them, especially when you read them now, like in collections or things, it gets to be a little burdensome. And even then I remember like thinking, man, Spider-Man has the worst luck, and they always have to reset it. And I guess, for dramatic reasons and everything. Yeah. But it was still kind of a chore to see Spider-Man, suffering and having all these problems when he's such a cool guy and this great hero. Whereas Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, you don't get so much of that. Every now and then, there's some references to some money issues, Aunt May's health or something, but it's more lighthearted, and you don't get the feeling that being a hero is such a huge burden for these characters.
Yeah, they seem to be enjoy being heroes, and yeah, every now and then it gets in the way of dating or something. I mean, there's something you didn't see on Super Friends, except for maybe like in a Wonder Twins or something, where
right.
Some dumb kids who are dating and got into some sort of mess.
Right.
But it is definitely a better on his luck Peter Parker than I think even that probably the other 80s cartoon had more of him being down on his luck. I think just by virtue of having a lot more J. Jonah Jameson probably.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of leads me to like one unfortunate thing about this is with the emphasis on the friends, there's less Spider-Man. And I also love the fact that they bring in as many other characters from the Marvel Universe into the cartoon. That's one of the things I loved about it at the time, and I love about it now. However, it does have the effect that Spider-Man winds up as like a supporting character in his own series.
Right.
So in many ways, as far as like pure Spider-Man, I think the other series is a little bit better. It's more like Spider-Man, and I think the Spider-Man sounds more like Spider-Man because he gets to do more Spider-Man things and do more quips, you know. However, I like the voice in this one, and like the characterization I think is really good. It's just he's more of a team player, you know, even though his name is above the marquee. But it's really more of a group cartoon. So there's some trade-offs. I think both series are absolutely worth watching, but this is just in some ways it's totally different than the one that's just called Spider-Man.
Yeah, I think this is the voice I think of when I think of Spider-Man.
Yeah, me too.
Maybe even hear a little bit when I read it. Probably not, but in general, almost every Spider-Man cartoon I can think of did a pretty good job with his voice, I think, of not like keeping it human and not being sort of Dudley Do-Right or something. You know, like some of the other characters in this, even not talking like this, so that he could quip. Like if you have that kind of voice, a quip sounds dumb, and he's supposed to be a kid or a young guy. He's not. And so I think we're kind of all over the place, but we'll come back to the voices a little more maybe.
Okay.
I do want to talk about I agree, like the expanded, being able to see the Marvel Universe at that time. Like now, of course, we can't get away from it, but
right.
At that time, that really hadn't happened except for the 60s cartoons we love, which honestly I saw once or twice as a kid on vacation somewhere else. Like those didn't air around me, as far as I know, or they did on a crummy UHF channel that we couldn't get or something. But
yeah, I do remember one of the New York stations showing those. I think every day I'd watch those after school at least 1 year, and saw them very regularly. But they were older and they felt different. I mean, you know, the animation was cruder and it just felt different. And you know, like as you alluded to, this was a different time, and there wasn't this interconnected universe of movies. So while you had, you know, the great Red Brown Captain America TV movies, the Doctor Strange TV movie, I mean, these things you might catch them and they'd be gone. You know, I mean, you had the Hulk TV show, but a lot of seeing the other Marvel characters, it was hit or miss. And if you missed it, you probably wouldn't see it again.
Right. So there had been the brief Spider-Woman and the Fantastic Four from the late 70s.
These cartoons were scattered like on different networks. There wasn't part of like a big Disney umbrella. Marvel, you know, kind of sold these off to different producers and different networks. So there wasn't one cohesive animated universe.
Exactly. Yeah. But then the Super Friends, you're getting an expanded universe every week because there's 10 people on the team. But, you know, they didn't necessarily always, other than the sort of challenge of the Super Friends season, include a wider part of the universe in terms of villains and things, or just random people other heroes showing up. So this was definitely exciting that, you know, you were getting Captain America, like you said, and Doctor Strange and Hulk and Namor and some odd things like Shanna. Is it Shanna, or does Kazar show up in the Kraven one, or just his cat? Isn't Zabu as part of it?
I think he's in one of them, but I think he might have been in. I'm not sure which series he was in.
And Thor and Loki show up in one. It was pretty cool back then, especially like this start. It was around the time that I was already reading Marvel stuff, but it's around the time I started really, you know, being a full-on nerd about it. So.
Now, Spider-Man, he did seem to be all over the place. There was the live-action series, which was a little bit before my TV watching time, but I do remember one of the local TV stations would show that on weekday afternoons. I think like at 4 o'clock or something like that would be on it, and I watched it then. And, you know, it wasn't great, but I enjoyed it. It was Spider-Man, and I sure wish that was on Disney+. Spider-Man was on, you know, the Electric Company. So he always seemed to be like, they'd always find ways to get him out there. Not so much the other characters, though, but Spider-Man, they seem maybe a little bit more committed to doing stuff with him, even though he didn't have a big live-action record. And of course, the Electric Company skits, I guess, were sort of live-action, too. That was kind of a whole another thing.
Yeah, I mean, he's their flagship character, right? So it makes sense. And, even now, or even, like, my nephew, who's a teenager now, when he was young, he knew who Spider-Man and Batman were well before he knew comics or anything. And I remember him watching, being 5 and watching the reruns of the 90s Spider-Man, I think, and knowing a bunch of stuff that I didn't know because it was based on, it was like stuff about Black Cat and You know, just he kept talking about Felicia. I'm like, who is Felicia? But Spider-Man is just he gets into the pop culture,
and we're at a time right now where Spider-Man is arguably the Marvel character again.
Yeah.
And I kind of like that. I mean, as much as I enjoy the Marvel movies, I was always a little uneasy with the idea of Iron Man or whoever being like the flagship character for Marvel. And there's this weird situation with, Sony having the rights and everything and multiple Spider-Man franchises, it kind of crammed into a relatively short period. But the bottom line for me is that, I mean, you can say that Spider-Man is number one, and I like that idea, especially like somebody who appeals to kind of all ages and kind of all groups. I think it's really cool that Spider-Man's back on top.
And the other thing that people say about him is that because he's got the full mask, it's easy to imagine yourself as Spider-Man.
Which is funny because in some of those movies, they spend a lot of time figuring out ways to get the mask off of him.
Of course.
So that we can see, the actor's face.
You're not paying Tobey Maguire to not see that Tobey Maguire face.
Well, I'm not paying Tobey Maguire anything.
If only they could figure out a way to interpret his spaced out look into a Spider-Man mask.
Yeah. Maybe someday.
Yeah. The technology's getting there. So now, if memory serves, and I know you'll have the details on this was one of those shows that aired near the end of the cartoon day.
That is correct.
So I think a lot of weekends I didn't get to see it because of other things like soccer games or basketball games or things going on. Not ones that were on TV, but that I'd have to go play in instead of just sit around and watch TV. Which
boy, what a rough childhood that is. You couldn't just sit around and watch TV all day, man.
No,
you had to get out of the house sometimes.
Yeah,
it's a very sad,
trust me,
sad tale.
To soccer, I would have gladly stayed home and watched cartoons instead of to go play soccer. And in particular, I remember an episode, not the episode we're going to talk about, but one of the episodes featuring the X-Men, the origin of Firestar, like some other kid telling me about it. And then it was like my mission to see it, and it took a very long time for it to happen to roll around again.
Oh,
but they described it, and it's like Juggernaut, and it has X-Men and Wolverine's in it with an Australian accent, and like claws some fruit, and So, and I was already into X-Men by then and really needed to see it.
That must have been gratifying, though, for it to show up. Like in those days when you just catch something in reruns.
Yeah.
I mean, how cool is that? It's like, oh, wow, this is my lucky day.
But then on top of that, I think when we were talking about Thundar or 1981 cartoons or something, those things were up against each other for a while, right? So what was I choosing to watch? Maybe I was burnt out on Spider-Man. I don't know. But I certainly saw a lot of it.
Yeah, I think I did too. And I remember a lot of comic book ads and really enjoying just the presence of it. I can't remember. I think it was NBC would heavily advertise in comic books. But also, you'd see promotional stuff for Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, and that was cool. And I think I had, probably similar to you, that I don't think that I was able to see it every day at 11:30 or whatever. But I think maybe the fact that it had a relatively short number of episodes, but it was in reruns for a while, helped me catch probably a lot of these episodes at the time.
And I mean, it aired in syndication later, like well into the early 90s, I think. So, caught things here and there, but still, and the syndicated one, I know I watched that some too, but I don't exactly remember when it was airing.
Yeah, so there was a cartoon called Just Spider-Man, which is also on Disney Plus, along with Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, and that was airing, premiered I think about the same time, 1981, apparently in like first run syndication, but that one I do not remember. I think I remembered of it, but I don't remember really watching it at all until, we got Disney Plus and started watching them. I think last year. So that's when I think I remember seeing like advertising for it, but I don't remember watching it at all as a kid. I don't really think I did.
I think I did.
Yeah. Well, I believe you.
It's possible, some channel was airing it with the 60s one, or I certainly watched plenty of that one.
Yeah. I know for sure that I watched Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends on NBC, but yeah, the other one, that's more of a mystery to me.
The other, I think sometimes like those 11:30 cartoons got preempted by stuff too.
Yeah,
like
good
local
point.
things, like sporting things, and so that was a little tough. Made it harder to see, unfortunately.
Oh, the other thing is that at the time, the episode we're going to talk about, when this premiered, Spider-Man was paired with Hulk, And that one I really don't remember very much. I don't think I watched that as much as of Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. So it's possible that maybe at noon or whatever, I was out of there or something, or I just missed a lot of these. But it's another reason why I keep lamenting the fact that this this 1982 or whatever Hulk cartoon is not on Disney Plus, because that's another one that I haven't seen and would love to check those out. Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends I did watch on Netflix years ago. So that, as you said, has had a lot more exposure over the years.
Yeah, I don't get what's up with this Hulk. Why is it not out there? Because Marvel owns these things. I mean, they made them and they own them, so it's not tied up in. I can't believe it's tied up in the weird rights issues with Hulk. But
did Rick Jones have a band on the show and do a musical number every episode?
No, I don't think so.
I
think he wears a cowboy hat though.
Okay.
And they didn't get like the '90s one. Of course, got Luke Perry to voice him.
Sure did.
I think back in the 80s they weren't doing stunt casting yet, so.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't the 82 Hulk used as fodder for the Marvel mashups?
Yes. So was this.
Yeah. So it's not like they've totally buried it. So if they were able to use it for that, then yeah, I don't know what's going on with that. But I don't remember watching that Hulk. I remember it being on and paired with Spider-Man, but I really don't remember watching that so much. As Amazing Friends I do, but not so much that Hulk cartoon.
Yeah, I definitely watched it, although I don't remember much about it, other than I think we've talked about before the Quasimodo episode, because there was a comic adaptation of that too, where the Bruce Banner goes to France and runs into Quasimodo.
Talk about somebody with bad luck.
Yeah. and there's an episode of Amazing Friends of Hulk that seems to be I don't know if it's where it falls into when things were on, but it might be a precursor, but it's definitely the same. What is it? Michael Bell doing the voice of Bruce Banner did it on the cartoon, and it was Duke and all sorts of cartoon voices back.
Yes, very prolific.
Back then. Yeah. So yeah, let's talk about some of the voices here. Alluded to it already, but you mentioned the Peter Parker Spider-Man actor, Dan Gilvezan as Spider-Man Peter Parker and other things, and apparently he's a live-action actor too.
And he was Bumblebee on the Transformers.
Yes, and Frank Welker as Bobby Drake, or as Toy Galaxy would say, Frank Megatron Welker, but also Fred from Scooby-Doo and probably literally a million other voices.
Yeah, for sure.
And Kathy Garver as Firestar, so she was on Family Affair and was in movies as a kid, and then I guess moved into voice acting some point.
Yep.
And then a whole group of recognizable people. I mean, Hans Conried as villains, and Alan Melvin as Electro, at least. And Anne Lockhart, who we talked about in Battlestar Galactica, did some voices. And one of my favorite things is June Foray as Aunt May. I mean,
yes.
Who better to play classic Aunt May?
Yeah. Classic doddering old fool Aunt May.
Yes. And then hearing her sometimes, do like a random voice of like some kid on the street, like yelling something, and, it sounding like Rocky.
Right.
From Rocky and Bullwinkle is awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of greats. And John Stevenson, who is Mr. Slate on the Flintstones.
Oh, okay.
He shows up a lot. I think he's J. Jonah in at least one, and Loki, I think.
Yeah, and he's a couple voices in the episode we're going to talk about.
Yes, he's one guy that it seems like I keep hearing an awful lot in these Marvel cartoons. And
yeah, I forget his name. The guy who was the narrator on Super Friends does it. Or is that John Stevenson?
You thinking of William Woodson?
Yes, William Woodson. So he's J. Jonah and Doctor Strange and Namor. And
yes, Namor is the one. Yeah.
Alan Young is in some, and yeah, it's a good group of people doing voices.
It's a very talented cast, and I think they're perfect for doing what they're supposed to be doing. We already said how much we enjoyed the Spider-Man, and for me, growing up, I think this cartoon's part of the reason why I always thought of, and maybe a little bit like the live action. I kind of thought Spider-Man is like an older college student or a young man rather than a high school student. So to go back and read the earlier stories, I was a little bit put off to see, puny Parker as a teenager. I mean, originally he's supposed to be like in high school, not. But I always thought of him. I prefer to think of him more as kind of an older guy, really. And this portrayal has the right amount of youthful exuberance, but also a little bit more of a maturity. I think there's really and I mean this in a good way. There's a real Alan Alda quality to his voice and his delivery a lot of times, I think. And I think it really works for the character.
Yeah, he would have been good at one point. I mean, because he can be serious, but he can quip.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, no, I think those are good points. And you know what else helps the show? The designs look a lot like the comics. Look specifically like John Romita Sr., who I thought actually did the designs, but maybe that's not the case. But I mean, the Peter Parker looks like Peter Parker looked in that period.
Yeah.
In the 70s and 80s. And Firestar, when she's civilian identity, of course, looks like Mary Jane, but
right.
To me, I know, Steve Ditko's the king of Spider-Man, but really that John Romita Sr. look is, when I think of Spider-Man, that's what I think of. Because I think that's kind of what they used in the comic strip too. And
yep.
So most of the time, occasionally the models are a little more off. It looks like the comics.
Like the Ditko look wasn't used as much for, licensing and stuff, like things that we grew up on. Like if you get like toys, like, I had a deck of cards that I loved, like a giant Marvel cards. Yeah. Weren't those awesome?
It was like a game, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Just things like that, that, and thinking of like 7-Eleven cups and all that stuff from like that time period. You just think of kind of a different Spider-Man look that much more resembles what we see in this cartoon.
Yes. Now, there are some episodes. So this has 3 seasons, technically, although it's only 24 episodes.
Yeah.
And what's the breakdown again? Is it 13-3 and
13-3 and 8, I believe.
Yeah. So the 3 are all origin stories, including the one I mentioned, the origin of Firestar. But at least those 3 episodes, to me, looked like they had been done by a different... Like the animation is different. It's more like G.I. Joe looking.
Yeah.
A little more anime, a little off model. Everyone's a little bulkier. In some ways, it's higher quality, but I don't like it as much.
Yeah, it was a different company that did those 3 episodes for some reason, and then stopped doing them.
Right, yeah.
For another unspecified reason.
Right. So, that's interesting too. Again, those are probably a little more consistent looking and have some other things that are higher quality, but, they don't look like Marvel Comics to me. So I still prefer these other ones.
Yeah.
And, of course, now it's fun to see things, the inconsistencies and things.
Yes.
Sometimes, so.
And there's another big change, right, that happens, I guess, with season 2 is when they... Now, this is a little confusing, too. Maybe you can shed some light on this, Mike. But so from what I understand, I guess with the second season, Stan Lee starts doing narration. But at some point, they also put Stan Lee narration on the early episodes for syndication for the first season. But yet, I believe the episodes that are circulating now, they don't have the Stan Lee narration in the first season.
That's my understanding, yeah. And I think they added it when they, added the Hulk. So it was a way, because he was narrating the Hulk too. So that's why they started using it on Spider-Man, but then they went back and added it so repeats would be consistent.
I see. To have a little bit repeats and more continuity within the hour.
Right.
And I love the Stan Lee narration. When you hear it now, like the Stan Lee narration, it's hard to believe they didn't do it from the beginning. Like, it just seems like such an obvious thing to do. Like, it's like, well, why didn't they just do this from the get-go?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they didn't want him around.
Oh.
They just didn't want somebody sticking their nose in. Even though it was Marvel Productions. I don't know. Or, maybe they just didn't think of it. Or maybe he didn't think of it. And then he was watching. Oh.
Yeah.
Here's what I suggest. But like, this raises the question. So normally, I think both of us would prefer whatever originally aired to be the version you're seeing on a streaming service or DVD.
Right.
But in this case, would you rather have the version that has his narration added because you enjoy his narration? Or maybe an optional thing to choose from the audio options?
Yes.
With Stan Lee narration or without Stan Lee.
Yes, why not? They could have alternate audio tracks. Disney's a very large company that they got plenty of money, and it would be very easy for them to do that. I say, why not? I'm kind of surprised that they don't have like the Stan Lee versions just across the board.
I mean, I know the episodes are airing in like multiple languages, like even, I don't know, Danish or something. So yeah, why not?
Yeah, it just seems like, again, just kind of a lack of care. They don't really care about this product and they're just throwing it up there. But, unlike the live action and the Japanese Spider-Mans, at least it's up there. But they could certainly do a lot better with it. And that's a good example of something they could do, but they didn't. To answer your question, I'm glad they have it. I'd rather have it originally aired, but it would be nice to have an option to watch those ones with the Stan Lee ones and not have to go somewhere else to do it.
And the other anomaly, of course, is that an episode where they fight the Red Skull is not on Disney Plus. Apparently, because it has too many Nazi symbols and people saying Heil Hitler, and I think even in footage of Hitler or something. The Nazis are clearly bad guys in it, so it seems a little silly to me.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I understand their thinking on this, except I don't think they've ever said what their thinking is. They just didn't put it up there, and they don't really advertise it. And if you look on Disney Plus in the order, it skips over. It goes from like 11 to 13 or something in the episodes. They just quietly didn't put it up there, and it's pretty ridiculous. With all especially now with the parental controls they have and the content that they're putting on there. To me, it's just yet another example of how animation is seen as, for kids and or morons, and it just gets no respect. It's just not treated seriously enough. It seems to me like the logical thing to do would be to go ahead and put a disclaimer if you need to, but, put it on there and now you could put it up there and have it be, parentally controlled for access. I will say that watching it is a little jarring seeing, some of the imagery in it and how upfront it is, but I don't see any reason not to put it up there.
Yeah, I don't either. And back in the 80s, we'd seen Raiders of the Lost Ark and things, so it wasn't abnormal to see that stuff. Always, again, portrayed villainously. Like, there's no praising of it.
Yeah.
He's clearly a villain, and his henchmen are villains and kind of dumb. The heroes win the day.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I just don't understand that. I definitely don't agree with it. And like you said, Raiders of the Lost Ark was one of the biggest things among kids at the time. Kids were watching it, and there were toys and merchandise for it. Maybe it's apples and oranges in one sense. They're different companies, and it's a different time now. But yeah, you and I aren't making this argument like we're not complaining because there's hardcore racist imagery or something, or not like those people that have like this massive collection of Nazi memorabilia and justifying, hey, we're collectors. No, this is a cartoon of good versus evil that does have a little bit of a kind of a shocking if you're not expecting an amount of the imagery, but it's done well, and it's a good episode too, and there's no reason it can't be up there in my opinion.
So I guess we should start talking about this episode.
Maybe we should, yeah.
So it's called The X-Men Adventure, and I may have influenced the choice of it, but I know you've got some of the specs on it.
Well, yes, and I like the idea too of doing the X-Men just because we've gotten so many other Marvel characters into the Battle of the Network shows-averse, and this is a good chance to get some more in there, specifically some X-Men. And we'll get into this, and you've alluded to it already, but I was not a big X-Men reader at the time. You were more of an X-Men fan, but they were and are a huge part of the Marvel Universe, so it's cool to do this episode, I think. The episode premiered Saturday, October 29th, 1983. And we were talking off air. I could run down, what else was on that day, but it would take like, half the episode just because there's so many shows on a typical Saturday morning in that time. So I'm just going to tell you what was on opposite it. So we're talking 11:30 is when it premiered on NBC. It was Spider-Man, His Amazing Friends, and the Hulk, and then Thundar at 12:30. On CBS at 11:30, it was the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner show. And on this particular Saturday, they had a football pregame show. They had some college football game afterwards. And ABC at 11:30 they were in the middle of a Scooby-Doo, pup named Scooby-Doo, and Schoolhouse Rock kind of combination, I think, based on the TV listings I was looking at. I don't remember seeing Schoolhouse Rock being listed in TV listings regularly, but the New York Times had Schoolhouse Rock, so that's what we're going with. And at 12 o'clock, it was Weekend Special, which was an anthology. In this case, it was Bunnicula and American Bandstand at 12:30. So at 11:30 when Spider-Man's on, you're probably watching some kind of Scooby-Doo, Bugs and the Roadrunner, or, this, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends.
All right. Now, this one I don't remember seeing until it was on Netflix.
This particular episode?
Yeah. So I had only knew about the one X-Men, and in fact, the X-Men appear in 4 episodes. In cameos in 2. In the Ice Man origin, you see the classic X-Men. Cyclops, Angel, Beast, and Marvel Girl, and Iceman, of course. And in one of the Video Man episodes at the end, you see the X-Men in a non-speaking part, and then they appear in the Firestar origin and this one. And Firestar, we should mention, was not a comics character. She later became one because she was popular on the cartoon, but she was created for this show because they couldn't use the Human Torch, who is a traditional Spider-Man pal. Like, Iceman is not a traditional Spider-Man pal.
No.
Torches, and it's interesting. I feel like this really upped Iceman's profile, too. Like, he was a kind of a character who was, they were, in the comics, was, after the original X-Men ended, was kind of, he was in the, the Challengers for a while? Or the Champions.
Champions, yeah.
Which is like one of the weird, what is it? It's Iceman, Angel, Black Widow, Ghost Rider, and Hercules.
Yeah, I think so.
In LA.
Yeah.
And then around this time, he was on the Defenders with Beast and Angel, and Defenders were always a weird hodgepodge of characters, a sort of non-team team. So I think this helped him out.
I think my vision of Iceman was really shaped by this cartoon, even more than anybody else's. So I kind of think of him as this kind of dopey, like well-meaning, but kind of not all there. Yeah, and just a little vacant sometimes, Iceman.
In the original X-Men, he was sort of the little brother character, because I think he was younger than the others, and they treated him that way a little bit.
You know, I'm going to admit something. At the time, I think I kind of resented Firestar being there.
I probably did too, yeah.
Because partly, not because she was a girl, so much as because she wasn't a comic book character. And I remember thinking, well, why don't they get one of his comic book friends in there? And it was kind of like, oh, this is a character, created just for the cartoon. That's kind of lame. But, the fire-ice dynamic is kind of cool visually. And I've grown to like Firestar so much that right now, as we record this, I've got my recently acquired Marvel Legends Firestar figure right here, complete with Ms. Lion figure as well.
Yes, Ms. Lion, her dog, a.k.a. the thing for kids.
Yes.
As if the superheroes aren't enough.
Now, Ms. Lion did annoy me
Yes.
as a kid. However, watching them now, I can see Ms. Lion is actually probably one of the more intelligent characters in the series.
That's true.
And in many ways seems to be more with it than the rest of them at times, and seems to have better instincts. But so I'm glad to have a Ms. Lion now. But really cool to have the Firestar figure, and turned out to be kind of a cool character. I saw a couple of different places that, and I think the voice actor of Spider-Man said in an interview that I listened to that his belief was that they couldn't use Human Torch because they were afraid that kids would want to put themselves on fire, whereas Firestar was more like glowy and projectile powers. Now, that's the argument that was used, and some people don't really agree with, putting Herbie in there in the Fantastic Four cartoon of the late 70s. So I'm not sure if that's true, but for whatever reason, they could not use Human Torch, who, as you said, would have made sense. But
right, because you see elsewhere that it was a rights thing. Like, there was some deal to develop some sort of show with him. And it caused the problem both times.
Which is funny. That must have been like the longest running, I mean, even for Hollywood, where things can be in development for years, never go anywhere. Like the Human Torch single-handedly altered, multiple projects, and never was in one of his own during that period.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Herbie was way more disappointing at the time than Firestar, because it knew enough about the Fantastic Four to know that there should be a fire guy.
Yeah.
Not a cute robot.
Right.
But yeah, I like Firestar. The design is great. And I think probably it opens at the time, because, of course, boys maybe weren't supposed to be sensitive or whatever, all that. I think it does open up those doors a little bit more for some of those emotional things you were talking about. And the fact that they integrated her into the X-Men world. And that's sort of, I think, currently where she is, at least. And it gives a good contrast. The one thing I don't really care for is that, especially in some of the earlier episodes, there seems to be like a romantic competition between Spider-Man, or Peter, and Bobby, Iceman, for her. That just seems misplaced.
I think overall she seems more interested in Spider-Man or Peter, but there seems to be, I don't know. Yeah, it is kind of awkward, and the whole dynamic. And even then, it was kind of confusing. I mean, they're all living together. They're friends, but yeah, it seems like there's this good-natured I guess, sort of innocent dating kind of thing, where there's never any thought of anything serious, but it's like, hey, I'm going to take her to the movies and you're not, just kind of a friendly rivalry kind of thing going on. But even that's a little weird in some of these episodes.
But this episode opens with Firestar, and she is on a spaceship fighting some robots. And one of the robots turns the gravity off and she gets sucked into space. I do have a question about that, which is, since she can fly, why did that happen? But gravity doesn't seem that important. But then I don't think she uses her powers in the whole sequence. So maybe it turns out, of course, it's a test in the X-Men's Danger Room, which is famous from the comics, their training room. And in the 80s, by I think around this point or a little bit later, it had been upgraded with like alien technology. So it was like super sophisticated. And here they talk about holograms and stuff, which is part of it. In the 60s when it was invented, it was just all like robots and obstacle courses and flamethrowers and things like that. But it's cool. There's a thing that they never managed to get into the movies. I think they kept trying, but they always had to cut it because it didn't matter. But if you're reading the X-Men, you got to see the Danger Room at some point.
Yeah, and it's cool to see it. And this episode really puts it over as a real spectacle and
yeah,
an incredibly dangerous thing. I always thought the concept was kind of just a little weird, just because it was real but not real, and it was dangerous but yet not dangerous in some cases, and seemed to be modified a little bit based on what the story needs were, understandably. But I agree that it's very cool that they got it in here.
Yeah. And then we see, so part of it is like there's a control room overlooking it, and this is where we get our cast for this episode, and Spider-Man and Ice Man are there watching, support their friend. We have Professor X, folks know from the movies, the bald psychic founder of the X-Men. We have Cyclops, my favorite X-Man, a.k.a. Scott Summers, who shoots optic blasts out of his eyes. Storm controls the weather. We have Colossus, also known as Peter Rasputin, who you've seen a version of it. If you've seen Deadpool 2 especially, he's a big part of that. He turns into organic steel. And a Nightcrawler, who appeared in some of the movies, and he can teleport and stick to walls and looks like a demon, but is very nice. And then we have Kitty Pryde, a.k.a. Sprite, who can phase through walls, or phase through solid objects. And then Thunderbird, who is a Native American. He's in the comics, he was killed after 3 issues, but he was part of the all-new X-Men team that they introduced in the mid-70s. And I believe in the comics, his powers are super strength and speed and heightened senses. In this, he might have the heightened senses, but he can also shapeshift into a bear and possibly other things.
By summoning the great spirit of the bear.
Yes. So
when we were watching this, Laurie sarcastically remarked that his superpower was being stoic. Because, and I think this is John Stevenson, right, doing his voice, yes. I think.
Yeah.
And, it's kind of like that. It's not undignified necessarily, but it definitely is stereotypical, that Native American kind of voice he's doing. And Thunderbird doesn't really have a whole lot to do, except he has a couple of weird moments that we'll get to later. But, hey, better than being dead, I guess, in the comic book. So good for him getting in here.
Right. And, he looks cool. I think that's...
He does.
Part of it, and probably they just wanted to... I don't know, maybe they wanted to include a Native American. There are not a lot of choices in the Marvel Universe for that.
True.
Of course, the cartoon had already had Hiawatha Smith, so they could have brought him back, I guess. He's not an X-Man, but... And by the way, Professor X and Nightcrawler are voiced by Stanley Jones, who voiced Lex Luthor on the Super Friends. And he does quite a good job here with Professor X by essentially impersonating James Mason.
Yeah, I enjoyed this portrayal very much.
Yeah, and it is definitely a stuffy Professor X too, or not stuffy. He's wearing his wealth. Let's say he's got an ascot. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and there's a little iciness to him in some places. Like, I mean, right here at the beginning, we see him tell Firestar it was a test and she failed.
Yeah.
What kind of test was it?
If that had happened in the real world, you would be dead.
Yeah, he said, like, you wouldn't exist or something like. You would no longer exist.
Which, that fits with his character from the comics. He's one of those, is he a good guy, really? kind of characters. And then we get some narration from Stan the Man. explaining that, where we are and all of that. And meanwhile, outside, what appears to be a spaceship lands on the lawn, and a mysterious figure in a trench coat and a fedora overrides the security system, which has a very familiar voice too, and sneaks into the mansion. Meanwhile, everybody's hanging out in the kitchen, the dining area, the cafeteria. I don't know what it is.
Boy, let me just interject that I'm so glad that they got the X-Men's cafeteria on screen after years of wanting to see that represented in a cartoon. They finally they nailed it.
Hey, one of the important aspects of X-Men at that period was the X-Men just hanging out.
Yeah, okay.
Playing softball, eating, having some downtime.
Yeah, and getting some nourishment.
Yes, yeah. So while they're there, Spider-Man's like, oh, that danger room is really something. I want to take a crack at it. And Professor X says, oh, we can arrange that. And Kitty tells him, you'll be sorry. So then they go, and Spider-Man starts testing, and there's some electricity, and he smells ozone. And he's like, wait a second, holograms don't smell. And then some heat-seeking missiles start going after him, and it seems like these dangers are real, and Firestar melts the window and goes out there to help him, and Cyclops gets really agitated. It's like, I don't care what the computer says. That's danger level 7.
Yeah.
And Professor X is, astonishing. Cerebro won't respond.
Yeah.
Luckily, Cyclops saves them by using his beam. I have some qualms about how his optic beams work in this, but because by then Spider-Man and Firestar have been trapped in some robot arms, and he shoots them, but it goes very slowly. Like it should just be.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out there's during this, Spider-Man winds up kind of like falling or getting knocked backwards, and just going whoa, which I love, and I just wanted to point that out because one of my favorite parts about Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends I've noticed, watching a lot of these in a short period of time, is the great exclamations they have with characters falling, driving vehicles into nowhere, plummeting, or otherwise getting thrown off kilter. You hear a lot of like whoas and and even the heroes, not just civilians saying it, but even the heroes wind up with these like surprisingly helpless sounding exclamations that I get a real kick out of. And Spider-Man's whoa is great. It's something to hear for sure.
Excellent point. So it turns out that this guy called Siberiad has taken over. He's interfaced with Cerebro, which is the computer that's running everything. I think that's taking some liberties again with the comics, but I'm trying not to be too nerdy here. Anyway, he's basically taken over the mansion and the danger room and the computer and all of that, and he's there for vengeance against someone. And because he's got control of Cerebro, that means he's in the attic, and they're in the sub-basement, so they're going to have to get up there past all sorts of traps that apparently Professor X had already put in the house.
Yeah, is this a Batman thing where Professor X protected himself against everybody else going rogue against him and devised these elaborate schemes to kill them?
It could be, because it seems like Siberiad uses information at hand to do the same thing. So, I don't remember him doing that in the comics, but that doesn't seem out of character for Professor X from the comics either, to be prepared. Anyway, Nightcrawler, who can teleports up to the attic, and Siberiad traps him in some sort of plasma bubble, I think. Meanwhile, Siberiad has shut off the power, so they're kind of trapped in the basement, but then Colossus awesomely says, "Not all the power!" And because he's metal, his voice is reverberating. And he just smashes through a door. And then they're out in the hallway, and Firestar, something about Siberiad unnerves her. And because Siberiad already said, one of them is the reason for this, Professor X does a psychic scan of everyone to see who knows Siberiad. But he promises not to probe Spider-Man's secret identity. And Spider-Man calls him a class act.
Yes, it's maybe my favorite moment in the cartoon, because he gives like the OK symbol, like, Professor, you're a class act. And then just like kind of linger for just a fraction of a second on him. And it's like, okay, that's nice.
Yeah. So then it turns out it's Firestar, and she has a repressed memory. That part seems weird. That like she's totally forgotten this incident.
Yeah, because once it's unpressed, it's rather vivid, and it seems to be a real big part of her.
Right. When she was in college on the West Coast, which is again is why I think maybe they're grad students. I don't know, or maybe she transferred. I don't follow.
Yeah, that was a little confusing. Yeah.
she, as Firestar, not as Angelica Jones, her alter ego, fell in love with a physicist named Nathan Price. And he was doing experiments to, quote unquote, mentally fuse matter to antimatter. And she was helping him out. And then a couple guys from AIM, they don't name them, but they're clearly from AIM, one of the evil scientific organizations in the Marvel Universe, attack, and this causes an accident. And in trying to help, Firestar doesn't help, and Nathan gets hurt perfectly symmetrically. Half of his body is ruined.
Yeah.
And he blames her. And turns out that this Cyberad is Nathan.
Yeah, and such is the lot of a female character in these cartoons back in the day. Unfortunately, throughout the series, Firestar has a habit of falling for the wrong guy.
Yes.
And there are multiple episodes where something unfortunate like this happens. It wasn't really her fault, but we'll give him the benefit of the doubt and say that Nathan Price was drastically affected by this tragic yet very awesomely symmetrical accident. But he's not a good guy now. He's bitter.
Yes, he is. Although we learn later in his bitterness, he programmed the cybernetic part of him. So he's half, his bad half, destroyed half is all robot, and then it's a little bit like Two-Face and Batman, and then his other half is still okay, and that he programmed the cybernetic part for vengeance. And occasionally we'll see there'll be conflict between Nathan and Cyberad, but Cyberad is more powerful. And of course he's programmed, so he's very focused on his goal.
Right.
Then Professor X also reveals that by tampering with Cerebro, he's caused an overload and it's going to melt down in 2 hours and vaporize the mansion. So, and then on top of that, they get gassed. And it seems like there's a commercial break there, which is a pretty good break for a commercial, I think, having all your heroes gassed.
Yes. I'm thankful not to have the commercials as much as I like seeing... Although if they had the original commercials, I would watch it at least one time with those. But
oh, sure.
But in the moment here, I was so wrapped up in the story that I was relieved not to have to wait, 2 minutes to find out what would happen.
Right. And then we come back and Stan very dramatically explains what's going on. And then Storm uses some wind to clear the room of the gas and lightning to seal the vent off. And Iceman tells Cyclops to blast the door, but it turns out the walls are anodized against beams.
Huh.
Yeah, I don't know why.
That's an interesting feature.
Yeah. And interesting Cyclops didn't know about that.
Yeah.
You might be onto something.
It makes you wonder about the motivations of Professor X.
Yeah. So Kitty phases through. So again, that's what she does. She can phase through objects. And then she opens the door from the other side and they decide they're going to split up. So Spider-Man looks at Firestar and says, "How about you team up with me, lady?"
Yeah, he's pretty casual about it.
Yeah. So Kitty, Colossus, and Storm are going to take the main stairs. Cyclops, Thunderbird, and Iceman are going to take the back way. And Professor X, Spider-Man, and Firestar are going to try for the elevator. And then Spider-Man, in a little corporate synergy, says, "Let's be careful out there." And meanwhile, Cyberad programs Cerebro to use their own fears and desires against them. And he also uses a hologram version of Nightcrawler because, Nightcrawler is the team's jokester. So this Nightcrawler appears to Thunderbird, Storm, and Iceman and starts teasing them. And his hilarious jokes annoy Thunderbird, who chases him.
Yeah, this moment kind of bothered me. It made Thunderbird look like a fool because he gives no indication that he thinks there's anything up. I mean, they're in this situation here. It totally looks the way they played as if Thunderbird's just chasing after him because he's being annoying. Like, I'll get you, Totally, taking the bait and not stopping to think why Nightcrawler would be teasing him during this situation. That was pretty foolish. Although he somewhat redeems himself later.
He's the team jokester, so that's why he was doing it.
Nightcrawler, yeah.
Yeah.
He's got to. He's notorious for being the team jokester.
If that had been the Thing in the Human Torch,
yes,
that behavior would have made absolute sense.
Totally, yeah.
But, of course, in doing that, they get trapped. In this case, in a room where the walls are closing in. And there's a nice little moment. They don't do anything with it, but where Storm tells herself not to panic. And in the comics, Storm is claustrophobic. So I liked that.
That was cool. And I just recently read like some of these early X-Men comics, as you know, and so I was kind of more aware of that, and I liked the way they did it. They did, it was subtle, but there for anybody that knew that. And maybe even if you didn't know it, I mean, you could pick up on it.
Yeah, so I guess Siberiad is using that fear against her in particular, and then just the fear of being smushed.
Yeah, that's more a universal fear, probably.
Yeah.
But
and this is when Thunderbird calls upon the spirit of the great grizzly and turns into a grizzly bear and breaks him out. And then Iceman is like, I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, Professor X gives Firestar a pep talk and tells her, there's no hope. It's sort of like the Luke Darth Vader kind of thing. He's more machine and man and all of that. And she's like, no, I think Nathan's still in there somewhere. And then elsewhere, some sort of like tractor beams or something pick up Cyclops and Colossus and Kitty and pull them up to these panels in the ceiling, but they drop Kitty. So she falls and hits the floor, and then they go through the ceiling and into these different cells. So Colossus is in one that has anti-metal walls that reflect his strength back to him and knock him out. And he turns back to his human form, which also in cartoon fashion means turning his costume turning into his street clothes. And then the walls in Cyclops' cell are made of pure adamantium, the same magic marvel metal that Wolverine's claws and skeleton are made out of. And so his beams aren't doing anything. And then there's this weird, I don't understand exactly what Siberiad says his greatest fear is losing his sight, which, again, to be pedantic, isn't... In the comics, his greatest fear is him losing control of his powers, which he has to maintain through his ruby quartz visor or his ruby quartz glasses or keeping his eyes shut at all times. Otherwise, it's just constant energy coming out of his eyes. So, also, I don't understand how what's happening here is him losing his sight, other than the lights go out or something.
Yeah, that part was unclear. I do like the attempt to have the element of psychological warfare, but it's not particularly well executed in this case.
No. And meanwhile, hologram Colossus leads Kitty into a vibranium cell. Vibranium, folks might know from Black Panther. That's the metal that comes from Wakanda. And because it vibrates, she can't phase through it. And then he adds a sonic thing too. So, she's in a lot of pain. We go back to Cyclops and he regains his composure. Come on, Scott, baby. And then, another thing, I'm going to no prize this one, but so he narrowly focuses his beam to burn through the wall. Now, my only issue with that is that his optic blasts are concussive. They're not like lasers, like heat. But my no prize is that he's using it's the friction that's creating the heat. So that's how I'm going to explain that away.
I wish Stanley were narrating this podcast so that he could personally award you a no prize, because I like that.
I do too. So he gets through and he rescues Kitty, who's very upset, that Colossus would do this to her. And again, that's kind of an allusion to the comics where she probably at this stage still had, there was like a budding romance between them, her having a crush on him, although there's a slight age difference. So, but I thought that was a nice touch.
It was, and I was not able to find Kitty Pryde's voice, but she has a very interesting, sort of nasal, teenagery voice that I'm not saying it does or doesn't make sense. I mean, I'm not, but it was distinctive.
Yeah. No, I think it works. The Wikipedia lists Noelle North, but she doesn't have a Wikipedia page. So I don't know anything else about it.
There's a website that I looked at called spiderfriends.com that has a voice. It's a comprehensive look at the show, and their big page of voice credits. It's not formatted very well, so it's confusing. But I think they had unknown for Kitty Pryde, so I didn't see that name, and I'm not familiar with it. But interesting. I was very curious who did that. And one thing, like many other cartoons of the era, there's not individualized voice credits at the end of each episode. There's one kind of big catch-all with a list of names at the end of each episode. So at the time, you couldn't get particular voice credits per character just for, by watching the episode.
Yes. So assuming that's the correct person, she was in Carrie. She voiced a girl in the Fred and Barney Meet the Thing cartoon.
One of the Marvel cartoons we didn't mention earlier.
Yes, yeah.
Although I think they were separated in that show, but...
Yes. They didn't really meet, did they?
Yeah, no.
Slouchy Smurfling, the voice of Video on Gem. She did a voice in The Facts of Life once. Was on Saturday Supercade as a Rhonda. Yeah, she's not even listed for this here, but so that might not be inaccurate. But she is a real person.
Okay, well, it's more information than unknown, so I'll take it. But...
Slumber Party 57.
Not Slumber Party apostrophe 57?
She played Patty, not Peppermint Patty, but Patty in You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown.
Huh.
In 1973.
Interesting.
Back to the show here. And what was the last? We were talking about Kitty's voice. Okay. So we go to Professor X, Spider-Man and Firestar, and they make it into the elevator, but then the cables snap. Or before that, Firestar is lamenting she's not sure how she'll get through to Nathan, and Spider-Man offers her some sage advice. Someone once said, "You never fall all the way out of love."
That's interesting. Who was it that said that? Was that Stan Lee?
I don't know who said that.
Oh, okay.
It was someone.
Yeah.
Maybe it was Aunt May. One of those after Gwen died or something. Aunt May comforted Peter.
He must have taken it to heart because he says it very, you can tell he thinks it's meaningful.
Yes. He's a good friend.
Yeah.
So the elevator cables get cut. Firestar blasts through the roof, and Spider-Man follows and uses his webs to slow down the elevator and pull them up to where they need to be, and everyone else is there. But now it turns out they have to go through the Maze of Madness.
What a great name.
Yes. I don't know what that's supposed to be, but it tells you everything you need to know, really. And Professor X gets pulled into another room, and then they go into the maze, because they have to. That's the only way to get to the control room. And Nightcrawler appears. But our boy Thunderbird knows it's not him because he doesn't smell of brimstone, which is what happens when he teleports, usually.
Yes, I'm glad Thunderbird using his other senses to impart some wisdom to the others.
Yes.
Not as impulsive as he was earlier.
So, and the Maze of Madness is very... just like a surreal sort of Dali, Steve Ditko, Doctor Strange landscape. And they're trying to make their way through it as a team, and Firestar is determined not to fail, like she did before. And we see a little bit of, Siberia and Nathan, arguing, with themselves.
As much as I love Stan Lee's narration, a lot of it is unnecessary. However, this is, in this kind of section here is where he does add to the melodrama of it and the flavor of it by saying, no matter what the odds, she must overcome and kind of building up the stakes. So it really enhances it here. I mean, it always enhances it. Yeah. But a lot of what he says, we can kind of see on screen. It really does feel like it's tacked on. But this is a good example of it really helping supplement the trippy visuals.
Yeah. I like to think that that's really what Stan Lee came to them with. It's like, I like the cartoon, but...
yeah.
You need... Sometimes people don't know what's going on. You need narration to reinforce the visual.
Yeah.
State the obvious. This is part of the Marvel magic. You just do it in a very dramatic way.
Yes.
So Nightcrawler appears again, and he says he escaped, and then he leads them into a trap. Everyone but Firestar. And it turns out Siberia, of course, who can hear everything, made sure to add the smell of brimstone this time around. So everyone except for Firestar is trapped in a bubble together. And she's alone, but she finds her way. And she confronts Siberia, and it turns out he's a hologram, and he's already skipped town with the central core of Cerebro in his spaceship. And she gets trapped in a different bubble, and she can't hear what they're saying. So Professor X sends her a psychic message that she needs to reach the Nega battery unit, and it'll deactivate her bubble. So she does that, and she goes after Siberia. Meanwhile, Spider-Man and the others, they're stuck in the bubble, and Spider-Man uses his scientific mind. He gets Cyclops to burn a hole in the bubble, and then he shoots a web through and pulls a cable from the battery and ties it to Colossus, and Storm uses her lightning to charge up Colossus, which charges up the battery and destroys the bubble. And Spider-Man, right before she does that, he says, as they say in the department stores, charge it, lady.
Yeah. It was delivered very well.
Yes.
I'll say that.
And I also enjoyed that while he's working on this plan, Professor X says, I don't know your secret identity, but you clearly have a scientific mind.
Yeah. Yes. One cool thing about this, too, is that it's a nice example of teamwork. I mean, if you have like a superheroes in a team, a lot of times, and even in the comic books, characters will get split off and doing like individual things, and that happens a lot in this episode. But this is one of the good examples of heroes working together and using their powers to complement each other, which I liked.
Yeah, and I would say that's an X-Men hallmark, is them working as a team. That's part of their training. In a way, maybe that's something that differentiates them from, say, the Avengers or the Defenders or the Justice League, where it's sort of a collection of established heroes who come together. But the X-Men have, trained together. It's more like the military or something, and so they're usually good at working as a team. Although you get somebody like Wolverine in there, he's a wild card.
He is.
He's not gonna give into flaming teamwork, bub. He's Wolverine. He's the best at what he does. So Firestar catches up with Nathan/Siberiad, and she's pleading with Nathan, but Siberiad's programming wins, and so she shoots him and fuses his circuits. And
wait a minute, in a kid's cartoon?
Yes. What?
Oh no, I know. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. You meant that literally.
Yeah. He does seem to die, right?
That's kind of the impression I got.
Yeah. The end is very rushed.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
She says, like, "Rest now, Nathan," or something. And then they cut to the Spidey friends, and they're walking to the sunset, and she's like, "You know what you told me about earlier about you don't ever fall out all the way out of love, and that's not true."
Yeah.
And he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry."
And then he puts his arm around her.
Yeah.
And they're walking off. Like, are they literally walking off into a sunset? I think.
Yes, they are.
There's something weird about this. Wouldn't it have made more sense for her to say, that it was true?
Right.
So she's saying that she did fall out of love with him.
Yes.
Which is good, but
when he died, I guess.
It kind of made it a little less poignant. It's one of those things that like looks like it's really poignant, but if you stop and think about it, it's like, wait a minute.
Right.
It doesn't quite add up.
More like she's okay.
Yeah.
Well, he's dead, but I'm not in love with him anymore, so.
I mean, I guess that's good, but seems like they sacrificed a little something there.
Right. This is a very fun episode, though.
It is, and my qualms with that ending aside, just the fact that they went for that is, as we kind of talked earlier, it's a little unusual for, even airing it at the relatively late time of 11:30 a.m. It's not the kind of thing you would see in superhero cartoons of the era.
Right, or the Smurfs.
Right.
Maybe the Shmoo.
Yeah.
Although the Shmoo was the soapiest cartoon on.
Yeah, you think so?
It's definitely the Shmooiest.
Yeah, that's no disputing that.
But yeah, for me, of course, it's a thrill to see the X-Men and a fairly decent interpretation of them. I know. So in the Firestar episode, the Cyclops voice is kind of over the top.
Yeah.
But here it's George DeCenzo, and he's doing just a very regular guy kind of voice.
Yeah.
So I like that. Like, I admire the 90s X-Men cartoon, the fact that they did it and that they adapted in their own way so much of the comics. But between the look of it and all of the voices being like super dramatic, I don't find it quite as appealing as something like this.
Interesting.
But all the Spider Friends got to do something. Iceman seemed a little, maybe didn't quite get as much screen time. Or not as essential.
Yeah. Spider-Man got his stuff. The episode spotlighted Firestar, and Iceman was the one who, maybe out of necessity, suffered a little bit. It wasn't a total non-entity, but yeah, definitely it's not an Iceman showcase, this episode, for sure. It is a fun episode. It has a different setting. We lose a little bit by not seeing, the classic, their like pad in Aunt May's house that turns into a, crime-fighting lab and everything. So I did kind of miss that.
And no Empire State University.
No Empire State University. Another one of our favorite things. They don't use the Spider Friends Go For It catchphrase. No. And another thing that we like that they don't always do is Firestar and Iceman saying their names when they turn into themselves.
Right. They're not... Actually, come to think of it, we don't ever see their civilian identities in this episode.
Right.
So, that's a little different, but there was a lot to pack in here, so...
True. I would just recommend to somebody, you gotta see one of the other episodes too to see them in their civilian guise to really get Spider-Man and his amazing friends, I think.
Yeah. But on the X-Men side, again, a nice nod to the comics is that a lot of times they were referring to each other by their regular names rather than their code names, which is something that they would do in those comics.
Ah, yes.
Because they know each other. They're in a school together. It's not like the Avengers where they're all keeping secrets from each other.
So I'm not sure if you said this earlier, Mike, but when you did, do you remember when you did happen to catch this episode, did you feel like some of these things that you're sharing now, like were you pleased, were you satisfied with it?
I don't know, because this is the one I didn't see it till it was on Netflix.
Oh, till it was I'm sorry, that's right. It was the other one.
Yeah.
That's right, okay.
I think I was okay with it, other than, again, the Wolverine having an Australian accent. And it's interesting they didn't use him this time. I think maybe they just realized there's not much you can do with him on a kid's show. He was stabbing fruit in that. So.
Yeah, this episode came after their main appearance.
Yeah, the Firestar one. And, that one's good. There's a large chunk where they're not in it, too, because she's recounting her childhood story. And the X-Men part is like a framing device for that. But it's cool to see that stuff. It's cool to see Namor and Doctor Strange, even though Doctor Strange doesn't do anything.
Yeah. Yeah, they really did get a lot of the big characters in there, who weren't otherwise in their own cartoon. They did a pretty good job overall in this series. I'm really enjoying watching these. I've got a few left before I go through them, and I'll be disappointed, when there's no more left.
Yeah, I still have some of the other one to watch, but I really enjoy it. And the other thing is, like, occasionally, like, Tony Stark and Matt Murdock appear, but not in their superhero disguises. You just get a little Stan Lee, I think, explaining who else they really are.
Yeah, and I think in the Tony Stark episode, he doesn't show up later, and Stan Lee explains that he's off-world, yes, like on some secret mission for the government.
That's right.
Which is why he doesn't, get involved in this situation affecting Stark Industries.
Yeah.
It's like, I'll accept it.
So I think my big qualm with this episode, and in general, except I like Firestar as a character, so that's not a problem, is that that we have this cartoon only villain, when the X-Men also have a lot of good villains they could have used. So, but it works in this case. But this and the aforementioned Video Man, who they really tried to push over. One, he turns out it's a totally different Video Man, and he's like a kid who wants to be a hero, but it's still that design. Yeah, but he's in two others. Yeah, Video Man. I don't recognize all the names of the writers, but, Christy Marks of Gem fame wrote a number of episodes, and then Dennis Marks, spelled differently, wrote a bunch, and his credits include, like, the Aquaman cartoon, and I think the 60s, some of the Batman cartoons, anyway, and like, he was an old hand at doing superhero adaptations.
And Don Glutt, I remember seeing Don Glutt wrote a few episodes as well. He did a lot of, like, other science fiction and I think comic book work and animation, so.
Yeah, so it's, if you like the superheroes, if you like Marvel, or if you just like fun cartoons from the 80s.
Yeah, it's not over the top crazy like Spider-Woman is.
No, not quite.
It's a different experience. It's fun in different ways, but it's not totally over the top like Spider-Woman. It's more, like you said, it's more like the comic books, that you would be reading at the time, which is a good thing.
Yeah. So thanks again to James and Lucille for requesting this. It was on our list, but I think it pushed it up some.
Yeah, and it's given, not that I needed one, but it's given me a good excuse to go through and watch the series again. And like I said, I'm loving it. It's very cool. And again, I will issue this plea to the Disney folks: put more of this stuff on there, especially the 1982 Hulk cartoon. But I will settle for the live action Spider-Man with Nicholas Hammond, or the Japanese Spider-Man, which I know you have because you put it on your on Marvel.com. Give us more Spider-Man, please.
Right, and 60s Spider-Man.
Yep.
And 60s Marvel cartoons.
Exactly.
I guess they probably don't own the 60s Fantastic Four, but...
Yeah, I think there's some weird things going on with, like, Warner Brothers or somebody, or at least one of those.
Yeah, I think that one's Hanna-Barbera.
Okay, yeah.
So, but then there's also the DePatie Freeling, and since they did Spider-Woman too, so where's that?
I cannot answer that. I don't know. Maybe it's in the Maze of Madness.
Oh.
Still struggling and trying to find a way out.
That would be, if you work in Disney Plus PR, maybe you should just consider adding that to your form reply.
Yeah.
Oh, we want to get everything on it, but our people tell us it's currently stuck in the maze of badness.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that would cut off all protests for me.
Yeah.
You can't really argue with that. Now, maybe if it were in the X-Men's cafeteria, that I would not accept. I'd say, hey, you can probably find a way out of there.
They probably have good food at the X-Men cafeteria.
I would hope so.
I don't know who works there, but somebody on work study.
Yeah, work study.
The New Mutants. That's part of their deal.
Yeah.
Oh, you gotta work in the cafeteria.
Gotta earn their keep. Yep. Well, thanks again, James and Lucille. And I guess maybe we should mention, Mike, if anybody wants to participate in the show, one of the best ways to do that is to join our Facebook group. Just go look for Battle of the Network shows on Facebook, and we've got a group. It's very easy to join. Just answer a few simple questions, just as a formality. And you can join us in and comment on Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends or anything. Make requests for shows and upcoming seasons, and we'd love to hear from you. You can also write to us at mailbag@battleofthenetworkshows.com and tell us what you think about Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends or anything else we talk about on the podcast.
And meantime, in your life, just remember, go for it.
I always try to.
And preferably say go for it out loud before you go for it.
Yes, if you don't say it out loud, are you really going for it?
Didn't Sart ask that question? Or was that also Stanley?
Sart, was he one of those robots built by AIM?
Yes, yeah.
S.A.R.T.E?
Sentient android.
Receiving transmissions. Eternally.
Yeah.
This episode brought to you by Ms. Line's Dog Treats, for the adorable, resourceful, funny dog in all our dogs. This episode also brought to you by Empire State University, giving thousands of dollars back to students every year in superhero-related insurance claims. This episode also brought to you by Aunt May's Lemon Squares, for the adorable, resourceful, secretly very powerful person in all of us. Join us next time for another exciting episode of Battle of the Network shows. Learn more, leave feedback, and suggest future episodes at battleofthenetworkshows.com. Follow us on Twitter at BatNetShows, and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Battle of the Network Shows.